Welcome to this event, which is our second event as part of the new Natural Materials monthly event series. We've got a really jam-packed programme for this evening. We've got 7 amazing speakers that we're really grateful are joining us this evening. We've got Barbara Jones, Craig White, Cypren Edmunds, John Butler, Phil Christopher, Dana Olărescu and Joe Duirwyn. Also, just to note, ACAN as a voluntary organisation, if we could encourage you to consider making a small donation if you can, even just £1 from everyone here tonight would make a huge difference. We've already had some donations through the tickets, so thank you so much to each and every person who's taken the time to do that. That's so appreciated. So, on with the event. The brief intro to ACAN. So ACAN is an open and voluntary network of individuals across the built environment industry. It was formed in April 2019 by a small group of architects trying to address the lack of climate activism within architecture, and has now grown into a global network of over 3,000 people. And it started for a vision for how we could work autonomously as a collective of individuals in order to make rapid decisions and respond quickly to the climate emergency. So ACAN has 3 core aims, and these are decarbonising now to radically transform the regulatory, economic and cultural landscape in which our built environment is made, operated and renewed in order to facilitate rapid decarbonisation of the built environment. Ecological regeneration. The immediate adoption of regenerative and ecological principles in order to create a symbiotic relationship between buildings and the natural world, prioritise communities and ecosystems at threat, and promote the recovery and restoration of our natural environments. And cultural transformation, a complete remodelling of our professional culture. We must challenge and redefine the value systems at the heart of our industry and education system. We seek to create an open network to share resources and knowledge to aid this transition. And we really see natural materials and the drive for using more natural materials in the built environment industry as spanning across all of these 3 really crucial aims. And we're really looking forward to digging into all these different elements in the coming months. So, how can we change the industry standards to use natural materials? This is the sort of core question of our group. So ACAN Natural Materials is the 8th thematic group within ACAN. We formed in April 2021, and our aim is to make natural materials the first choice for building elements in construction by providing concise and clear resources that are easily accessible. We're going about this by gathering and collating the wealth of information and resources that are already out there, many of which we're going to see later in this evening. We're working to build on these existing resources and fill some of the gaps that we might identify by creating targeted user-specific guides and typical details to make it easy for people to make the transition to building naturally. And finally, it's really important for us to find out what people need so that we can make sure that the information that we produce and the formats that we put it out into the world in deliver real change across the industry. So we're going to jump into a poll in a minute, which will give you a chance to sort of give us a brief in a sense, but we've also got a survey that's running at the moment for architects and specifiers, and we'll plug that later in the event. It'd be really brilliant if we can get as many responses to that as possible. And events like this evening form a really crucial part of our activities in gathering and sharing information, and the recording of this evening will become part of our online resource. So, what natural materials can you build with? Last month, in our first event, we had a brilliant introduction to a range of lots of different types of natural materials and a whistle-stop tour of the opportunities and challenges and case studies for each of these different materials. Now, looking forwards, we're going to start drilling into some of those materials in more depth. So this evening is our first masterclass, looking at a specific material through different uses, different forms it can take, a selection of case studies, and then also zooming out to look at it in the context of the industry as well. So this first event is looking at straw. And with no further ado, I'm going to hand over to our first speaker, Barbara Jones. Barbara, the floor is yours.
Thanks very much, Emma. Welcome everybody. It's great to be here and talking to you. What I'm going to talk to you about is a bit of history, first of all, for those of you who didn't see the last presentation on natural materials. And then the breadth of what's happening, not just in the UK, but around the world with straw, with the different techniques that are available, and some interesting ideas. And I'm going to talk to you about the technical guide that the School of Natural Building are writing, which is almost ready, and then just a little bit of thinking about the future and what that might look like. So I'm sure you probably all know, but Straw-bale building started back in Nebraska in the USA in the late 1870s when the Industrial Revolution started and baling machines were invented. The first ones were drawn by horses. And this is a picture of one of those early houses, which still exists. And there's a dozen or so houses that you can go and visit if you go to that area in Nebraska, that are still in existence now and still having people live in them. And these early ones were predominantly built without a frame at all in what we call the load-bearing style of building. And they were built with the whole community coming together to do it. So unbeknownst to most of us, what was happening in Paris in 1920 was the architect Monsieur Foyet built a house for ordinary people. He wanted to build affordable houses for ordinary people, and he used a lightweight frame to do it. You can see the old photograph from the newspaper cutting in the left-hand picture and what it looked like a few years ago, covered in ivy. So it's a real testament to how long straw lasts. So this house is now the headquarters of the French Straw-bale Association. There's absolutely nothing wrong with the straw. It looks set to carry on for another 100, 200, 300 years. So it's testament to the durability of straw. Unfortunately, his ideas didn't catch on then, but I think we're making a bit more of a difference now. So I went over to the USA in 1994 and learned all about how to build with straw. I was already a builder. I had my own company, and I just was completely inspired by the techniques. Came back here and changed quite a lot of it because I thought, we've already got a pretty good sustainable building tradition in the UK. We call it heritage building, and we need to get some of that into how we build with straw. And the first building that was constructed was by somebody called Matthews, I think in 1994, and I started building the year later in 95 with this little building here, which obviously is still in existence. And we did a lot of firsts in those early years. So we did the first two-story load-bearing, so no framework house in Europe, in Ireland, with Nerita Clesham, who owned the house, and over 100 volunteers. It wasn't the first two-story load-bearing house in Europe, in the world, because they've been doing it in Canada. So ModCell started making straw and timber panels in 2002. I'm sure Craig will tell you a bit more about that later on. And there are essentially 4 different ways of building with straw. There's the load-bearing style, which doesn't have a framework, where the bales themselves are taking the weight of the roof. There are various different types of building with a timber frame or a different frame, a steel frame, sometimes a concrete frame. There are modular and prefabricated ways of building. The ones used in this country are ModCell and Ecological. And then there are hybrids, which are mixtures of all those different techniques. Sometimes you might want to have a framework on the south side and the rest of it load-bearing straw, for instance. That's very popular with self-builders. And I should say that all of them can achieve passive house standards. So the first two-story load-bearing house that was built in the UK was in Wales in 2003. These early straw buildings took a long time to build, and generally the people who built them were extremely creative and visionary. So we ended up with very, very difficult to build but beautiful houses. And this one took 4 years of Rachel's life, but it is a lovely building and you can actually go and stay in it. It's on Airbnb. These houses here have become quite famous. They're the first social housing that was ever built in the UK, and they've only been replicated once by another housing association, because soon after we built them, the government in its wisdom decided that councils could not build their own houses anymore. And these were done to Strawworks standard details, and without using any tapes or any membranes, we achieved 2.62 air changes per hour, which I think you'll all agree is absolutely brilliant. And working with John Butler, we've actually improved on those results now. We can do even better details without using tapes and membrane. I just want to show you a few of the houses that are being built in other countries, because it's always good to broaden your field and see what other people, what other architects are designing. So this is a school that they built in France, and this was in 2014. And France started straw later than we did, but they are probably about 10 years ahead of us now. And that's because they've had government backing, huge uptake, and importantly, they have access to land to build individual houses on, which we don't. Ours is all tied up with property developers and major landowners. In the Netherlands, they built this huge social housing project with, this is a framework building where the bales are placed vertically. So it's important to understand that there's lots of different ways you can build with straw and lots of different orientations that you can use with straw. And you can also chop the straw up and blow it in. So there are quite a lot of different things you can do with straw. Not all of them are being done in this country yet. Germany so far has built the tallest straw building at 5 stories. In Germany, they're not legally allowed to build without a frame. So we have the advantage there with our building regs. But with frames, you can go as far as the frame will go. It's not to do with the straw. And Dirk Sharma is a famous straw-bale builder in Germany who's done an awful lot of the pioneering work there. We've been doing an awful lot of community builds around the country. And this is one that we're extremely proud of. It's still under construction. It's the neighbourhood hub for the Holy Trinity Church in Tulse Hill. It's a massive building. It's 680 square metres on 3 floors. And it's being built almost entirely by the community of the church and other volunteers. So we've done what we very often do for community builds and designed it with rammed car tyre foundations. And we had the opportunity to test them on this site and proved that these tyre stacks can take a load of a minimum of 1,000 kilonewtons per square metre. So just to put that in perspective, a regular 2-storey house requires them to take 150 kilonewtons per square metre. So it's in a very massively huge order of magnitude. It was designed specifically to be built by volunteers using all natural materials and recycled materials, and it's really difficult to get a good picture of it. But you can see our CAD mock-up, and you can inside is a photograph of the atrium at the front being built. I was there just a week or so ago having a look. It will cost 1.1 million to build it, which is half what it would have cost had it been built by contractors in the normal way. And we've saved them £100,000 by using cement-free car tyre foundations instead of regular cement foundations. So this is an example of a hybrid building with load-bearing straw at the back and timber and glass at the front, again built by the community and volunteers, and it's the first registered Living Building Challenge design that there has been in the UK. Just some other ideas to do with straw. You can do terraces, you can do passive house easily. So this is a load-bearing passive house built 6 years ago, which achieved 0.46 air changes an hour, and the lime plaster is the airtight layer. So there are tapes around the windows and doors and between the straw and the foundations and the straw and the roof, and that's it. You can use the very big jumbo bales for building with, and Werner Schmidt is really renowned internationally for his designs with Margareta Schwarz, and they've done some fantastic things in Italy and Switzerland. You can make vaults, and Huff and Puff, Phil Christopher from Huff and Puff is talking later. He'll maybe talk to you about that as well. But all sorts of weird and wonderful things you can do with straw. We built a festival entrance out of the big round bales. So there are also buildings put together with these as the corners of square buildings. Gurno Minka is well known for building with straw and for his clay work, and he's been doing fantastic domes around the place in various different countries all over the world. This is just a sneak preview of some of the work that we've been doing in our Interreg funded project for Upstraw, working with 4 other European countries. We are writing a technical guide to building regulations and building warrants for straw-bale building. It's almost completed now. We've been working with some really brilliant people. These are just a couple of examples of the chapter headings that will be freely available to everybody. And also the level of detail that we will be presenting to you. So we've worked with the most up-to-date research from around the world, which is also captured in a Zotero database, which will be, or is actually now available to you to access. And we've put together all of the information about the different aspects and different quantifiable parameters of straw, so that it should be really easy for anybody who wants to design with straw to meet building regs and to show how straw can easily meet and surpass UK building regs. So that's for all of the countries in the United Kingdom. So just to finish off with, to think about the future, you've seen a myriad of different ways of building with straw. I'm sure you've got even more creative ideas in your heads of what can be done with straw. We're just starting to get to the point where major developers are interested in building with straw. And so what I'm seeing is 2 main themes developing. One is that self-builders are being extremely successful in working with straw, and Strawworks in particular has specialized in simple and straightforward designs that can be built by ordinary people who are not necessarily professional builders, but can achieve buildings of this sort of standard. They don't look absolutely straight and 90-degree corners, but they look very organic and livable, and they're definitely cozy, and they're almost always built to a higher standard than the regular builders do on housing estates. And they certainly cost a lot less to build. And that's the attraction of building with straw and other natural materials for self-builders. And the other way that things are really changing now is the introduction of modular prefabricated straw panels, which can be delivered by truck to the building site. The walls of a 3-bedroomed, 2-story house can go up in 3 days with a crane and 4 to 6 people. And it's very fast to build. So within 2 to 3 weeks, you can have the external structure of the building completed and watertight. So that really is transforming the way we can build. And the the thing that's stopping us is the fear factor and of our contractors, and the fact that contractors are notoriously difficult to persuade to use something that they've not used before. But we're going on site, not with something like this, but with a regular school building in a few weeks in London, where we'll be training people on site to build quite quickly. Okay, so then I've got some other slides here, but I'm not going to go through them. They're just giving you more information. So if you look at these slides later on, you'll find other resources and places to go to find out more information. So I don't really need to go through the rest of the slides, but you can just go through them fast. There's an online course, there's more help everywhere, and different websites to go and look at. Thanks, everyone.
Brilliant. Thank you so much, Barbara. And there is a lot of love in the chat for your technical manual and what generosity that is and what a fantastic resource it will be. So yeah, thank you so much for that. We are now going to move over to our second talk, sort of looking at the potential of straw, what straw can do and the different forms straw can take. So I'll hand over to Craig, who is going to share his screen.
Okay. Great, thank you very much for asking. It's great to see you again, Barbara, and the work you're doing to record all the work that's being done across the world is a fantastic resource, and brilliant that Upstraw is sharing so much of that information. My name is Craig White. I'm CEO of Agile Homes, and I have been working with straw for some time, not as long as Barbara, but started ModCell in 2002, and we've gone on to set up a new company called Agile Homes, which I'll talk about in a minute. So we live in a time of multiple crises. I just left space for pandemic, but climate emergency and housing. And it's really interesting today that all over the BBC, all of the channels, apparently climate emergency looks like it may have started today, as far as the mainstream media in terms of their telling of that story. And of course, we've been on that journey for some time, but hot weather, lots of rains and disastrous flooding and fires seem to now have got a coherence in the messaging. So there's a challenge. And part of what's happened on the planet is just this year, we as a species have created more built weight assets and plastic than nature has done on the planet. So there is now more materials moved into buildings and whatever formats where we as humans want to move materials around, whether that be buildings or plastic bottles, that now outweighs nature and its ability to do stuff. And I saw a recent a wonderful post that we have poured sufficient concrete on the planet to cover it entirely with a 2 millimeter layer. And just to put that into some other statistics, there are 7.3 billion people on the planet, and we pour 7.3 billion cubic meters of concrete year on year. Concrete has its place, but it's not inevitably a high carbon material. It can be a lower carbon material, but we have become addicted to its use, steel and other materials. So we're reaching the point of peak resource on the planet, and we now are systematically changing all of the natural systems. And of course, I'm sure nobody's on this talk without having seen this set of slides. 2,000 years of temperature data. You see the invention of the steam engine, shortly afterwards the invention of the oil derrick, which allowed us to systematically extract oil, and we see the needle-like spike of temperature. So, but I guess everybody in this call is already alive to that. And of course, nature and carbon is part of an enormous system. We have 5 natural carbon sinks on the planet, and nature does move carbon around. We do it in perhaps powerfully unhelpful ways. So there's atmosphere, It's very large, turns out not to be a good place to store CO2. Ocean, by far the biggest, but too much CO2 stored in the ocean turns it acidic. Then we have geological, ancient carbon captured in Jurassic seas on the south coast of what we now call Dorset, where Portland cement comes from, in the form of sediments. And then we have the biosphere living, and then we have soils, which tends to be formerly alive bio material. So we will end up either drifting in the air as pollutants or in soil, contributing to the shifting of carbon around this huge natural system. And I'm going to come back to carbon cycling as we go forward, because the oil and gas industry is now very excited about the amount of money it can now make out of capturing CO2 out from the exhaust of power stations. And they are currently doing that at about €1,000 per ton, and they would like to get paid for that. And this is a model from the Carbon Capture and Storage Alliance, which says we can continue to extract fossil fuels out of the ground, we can burn them, we'll put something onto the back of the tailpipe of that power station, put it into geological muds, take it out to the North Sea in the UK, and then inject it and store it under the North Sea. And actually what that is just fracking by another name, and then they'll squeeze the last bits of fossil fuels out and burn it. So carbon capture and storage is a very neat trick of the oil industry to get paid to deal with the pollutants they are producing. And again, I'll come back to carbon capture and storage. So this is a sinkhole in South America. It's 200 meters deep, it's about 300 meters wide, and at the bottom of that sinkhole is a forest. And that forest leads into a cave. And what is driving the means by which those trees are thriving at the bottom of a very deep hole is photosynthesis. I struggle with that every time. Photosynthesis, the means by which nature has evolved the means of moving carbon dioxide, carbon molecules, and oxygen into different states. And of course, trees eat carbon dioxide. And if we have a look at that, and the means by which they do it is chlorophyll. This is plant-based photosynthesis. And these are the wonderful bio-evolved technique for capturing carbon. And they don't do it at €1,000 per ton. They do it for free for us right now. And then if we look really close on the underside of the leaves, if you go to scanning electron microscopes, you will start to see stomata, the means by which basically plants breathe. And if this were animated, you would see on a daily cycle these stomata opening and closing. And then thanks to the BBC, this is what they think photosynthesis is looking at, like at a photonic level. So this is a photon of light hitting a ring of proteins where nature does its photosynthetic chemistry, energy interchange, and the consumption of CO2 is the outcome of that. And at the moment, we still don't know exactly how photosynthesis works, but the most recent example is to say that it is actually a bio-evolved quantum machine. I have no idea really what that means, but it sounds really cool, very high tech, and therefore should form part of our marketing. We're into quantum mechanics when we build with straw. So we've got some ingredients. There is a sun, powers our system, and for the long run, it's going to do that for some time. We have water, the means by which minerals can be drawn out of the ground, and then we have a CO2 molecule on the right-hand side. And that, through the photosynthesis, is how we build the building blocks of life. So CO2 is eaten by trees. So the trees only pull water and minerals out of the ground. There is a second root system, and it's what we call branches and leaves, and that root system is actually consuming CO2. Photosynthesis splits the molecule into oxygen atoms, which are rejected back to atmosphere, and then we have carbon, which is the building blocks of complex sugars that we generally call cellulose in materials. So how much CO2 are trees eating? Well, for a European white pine, typical timber for construction, a 1 cubic meter of finished timber that we use in construction has consumed 742 kilograms of atmospheric CO2. So there's no longer CO2 in the timber, it is now carbon, but there is no longer CO2 in the atmosphere because the oxygen is now floating free and the carbon is stored in the built environment. So if we have a look at what does straw do, so a tree takes 30 years to do that. Straw does it on an annual, and in some parts of the world, straw can be cropped biannually. So for every 1 kilogram of dry weight straw, the straw has consumed through photosynthesis 1.6 kilograms of atmospheric CO2. So we have a short cycle carbon capture and we have a medium cycle carbon capture. So we have some ingredients. We have wood, we have straw. It is actually a picture of barley, but it's the best picture I can find to sit on the black background. And then we have some geological stuff, lime. Barbara mentioned lime. Lime is limestone heated up to about 1,000 degrees C, at which point it starts to be able to chemically bind in a variety of different ways. But Portland cement is heated up to 2,500 degrees C. So lime is not as strong as Portland cement, but has less than half the carbon emissions. So there's no fruit in anything we do, but it makes for a nicer PowerPoint presentation. And then we have some screws and glues that goes together. And then we can make buildings like these. These buildings are all prefabricated straw-bale buildings that use lime, straw, and timber, photosynthetic ingredients, some ancient carbon captured by Jurassic phytoplankton, lime, and then some recent stuff, timber, and then some super recent stuff, straw. So top left is the Knoll West Media Centre here in Bristol. In the middle top is the Bale House at Bath, prototype experimental house we built 10 years ago. Then the Haysfield Girls' School STEM Centre, top right, Nottingham University Educational Building, and then Straw-bale Cafe in Herefordshire. So what we can start to do, and one of the challenges we set ourselves is how do we move straw into the mainstream? And so we developed a system called Flying Factories. It's kind of used now by many people, and that's cool. And this is a flying factory for the Dewsbury office buildings that were built some 8 years ago. So we're working with glue laminated timber that is CNC cut. We're pre-compressing the straw bales into the openings, and then we have a structural panel frame. We build them in what we call flying factories. This is effectively a farmer's barn. You can see a combine harvester, a John Deere in the left-hand side. You can see bags of lime, bags of straw that we then combined with glue laminated timber frames. This is for, I think this is for a 3-story building. And then you can see the combine harvester on the left. And then we have, we don't have a big mallet with bonk on the side, but we do use big spades to get bales kind of lined up. And that's a prefabricated panel. And then it might get a little bit noisy now. So I'm going to just turn down my volume a little bit because this is an animation of us building the bale house at Bath. So this is day one. There is concrete down, and then we put the saw plate. Then the panels are going in. And then we work with the CLT first floor, and then we put the top floor on, and then we put the CLT roof and then wood fiber insulation on top of that. So 10 years ago, that took 2.5 days. Today, we can build a 1-story house in 5 hours and a 2-story house in now 2 days because we just have to take it over. So I'll stop playing music for you. And then that's the Bale House at Bath. We then subject it to an awful lot of monitoring and research. And so how have we done on carbon capture and storage? So let's have a look. If I could get all the CO2 to be greeny in color and be stored in one big cubic volume, we get 34 tons of atmospheric CO2. So that's what 34 tons of CO2 would look like at sea level pressures if you were to get it into one single space. And we have now captured and stored 34 tons, which is 45 years of a 2 kilowatt medium-sized domestic array running for 45 years, which is about 20 years longer than we anticipate the life of a PV. So we can then go bigger. So we're now going to move on to the Hayfield Girls' School, which I showed you a picture of earlier. And this is 376 metric tons stored inside that building. And we're going to have a look at that a bit more closely. So we work with Flying Factories. So this is 1.2 miles away from the school. It's a farmer's barn that we rented. And then these are sixth formers from the school. We work with 140 staff and students from the school, working with them in a variety of different ways, from education through to making. And these are 8 sixth formers who actually got involved in making the panels themselves. And at this point, it's an assembly. We're still working with bales, and then we put the bales in, pre-compress them, and then we have a structural frame, which then goes to site and goes onto a building like this. We're using cross-laminated timber. And then this is it's actually glulam beams for the floor. And this is one of the panels being laid in. And then this is the finished building. So this building is rendered in lime render. The straw-bale roof is made up of 18-meter long cassettes. That was good fun, working out how we could lift 18-meter long straw-bale cassettes into position. And so pretty much everything other than the windows and the services above ground are made of atmospheric CO2 captured and stored in those 3 materials. We do a lot of research work with Pete Walker at Bath University, and this is us looking and asking the question, how big can we do a structural load-bearing panel? So you can see a colleague of ours just about to start baling into that frame. And so we call this ModCell very big lime. And so to put that into context, that's a colleague of ours standing next to a 4.5 meter tall prefabricated frame. And what we were trying to do is to work out just how strong these panels are. So this was the panel, and what we're going to do now is tip it over until it's almost horizontal, and that will simulate the wind loading. So between inside and outside, we have lime render on top of straw bale, then pinned together with broom handles. We do have some stainless steel rods that tie the head down to the bottom, because we need to hold the tension in the bales, and then we're going to tip it over. So that's Pete Walker on the left looking underneath, and what we're doing, those are motion sensors to see whether the straw wants to fall out, basically. And it gets low, and you can see engineers peering underneath, getting quite excited. Then the engineers get quite cocky and stand on top of the panel and now jump up and down. So on the bottom face, there is 1.5 tons, metric tons of lime render spray applied to the straw. Then we have the straw bale, and then we have 1.5 tons of lime render on the top. And the engineers now jump up and down with glee at how strong that is. And that was to work with a big retailer. This is pre-financial crash. This was Marks and Spencer's when they were imagining changing their way of building buildings. And they did build with some hemp lime, which was fantastic. And we were working on this project, and then the financial crash hit, and those were the panels in situ. So
Craig,
we can build.
Jump in. Just a 5-minute warning.
Okay, thank you. So we can build with carbon, climate change sorted. So let's have a look at how we start scaling this. So this is Lilac Co-housing project in Leeds. It's a community-led housing development, and they just published 8 years worth of post-occupancy evaluation. That's what it looks like. So 2-story and 3-story prefabricated straw bale panels and straw bale roof cassettes. Cars all pushed to the edge of the development. I won't talk about co-housing too much. And you then have some amazing impact. So it's cool that it's made of straw. It's cool that it's prefabricated, but what's even cooler is the way in which people live their lives at a lower impact level than anybody else. And then the Sunday Times called them the ecos. Their quarterly winter bill for heating bill for a 1-bedroom is £20, and for a 3-bedroom, £50. So this is then moving forward. Lime render on straw, NHBC doesn't like. They're a bit nervous about that. So as Barbara said, you can go into timber framing and dry lining, and we were able to stack straw vertically in the buildings. We were able to certify that with build system to an ISO 2005, and then we were able to, the planners said we were building on a 1930s council estate, and they said, as long as your new homes look like 1930s council houses, that's okay, hence them looking like they do, but those are all prefabricated, open market, mortgaged houses. We went on to build another 18 homes in similar way in Bristol. Then some research background for those who are interested in diving in deeper to the material search. This is the ISO Bio project. If you Google that, you will find that. And we developed a variety of different prefabricated building systems working with hemp, straw, compressed straw board, hemp lime, and then we had to look at all the systems and then certified a number of them for passive house construction. So you can find out more and developed hemp boards as well with the partners. Then I'm going to talk about compressed straw board very briefly. So compressed straw board is straw put into a big machine, heated up to 140 degrees C. The moisture in the straw is turned to steam. Steam softens lignin naturally present in straw, and then you can bind it. So the lignin self-glues the straw together, and then you apply glue using conventional glue, paper on either side, and you get a structural board that is capable of holding up a 1.6 ton car, very simply supported at 800 centers. So straw is carbon fiber, if you think of it that way, and it becomes very strong. So then we change our system to say, okay, so let's get rid of the timber uprights and let's only work with compressed straw board as our sheathing boards and straw bale to do that. So from outside to inside, straw board replacing plasterboard, straw board doing sheathing, then straw bale, then straw board, then vapor check layers, breather papers, then battens and cladding. We certified that build system with the Passive House Institute in 2015, which is very exciting. So housing crisis, and I'm going to run home now. So we have a huge crisis. We need to build 340,000 homes a year, and we're only building half of them. And we have a vacuum at the center of our system. So we worked with the community of some disadvantage in Bristol, 5,000 council house, 1930s council house estate, and we worked with the community, and the community wanted 1 and 2 bedroom homes, and there were none in the whole of the state. So we mapped the whole of the state looking for space to build 1 and 2 bedroom homes, and we found 3,500 microsites in gaps, corners, no man's lands, and gardens. We then went into a guerrilla housing mode. So this is that build system we were just looking at earlier, compressed straw board, this time using chopped straw as the insulation. We built it in 10 weeks without planning permission, and then invited the bear to sleep in it. That's what it looks like on the inside. And now let's have a look at when you combine no longer working with lime, but now compressed straw board, timber, and chopped straw in this case. Let's have a look at the CO2 story. So that's the straw insulation, which is chopped. Then we have the compressed straw board, which is denser, but is providing the structural sheathing for the building. Then we have the skeleton, which is the timber structure. Then we have the larch cladding on the outside. And what we get is 27 tons of CO2 captured by nature and stored in a 1-bedroom town. So let's just have a look at that journey, and then I'll come to the end of my presentation. So we have CO2 emitted and we have CO2 captured. If you look at a typical house, there are some emissions to atmosphere, working with steel, concrete, glass, and other materials in construction. They also use natural materials, so they do store carbon as well. If we look at a timber frame house, it emits less carbon, and because it's timber frame, stores more carbon. But if you look at what we're doing, it's emitting less CO2, has timber, straw insulation, and compressed straw board. But just to put that into a kind of more male language and a more relevant thing for the future of explaining carbon capture and storage. So on the left, we've got a Tesla. It saves 273 kilograms of CO2 per annum. On the right, we have a TAM, or an Agile home, at 27 tons. So it takes 99 years for a Tesla to catch a building made of straw and natural material. So we do carbon capture and storage in ludicrous mode, and you have to be a car fan to work out what ludicrous means. And then I'm just going to finish on this one. This is 15 homes on top of a roof in Bristol for Emmaus, the homelessness charity. We just got planning permission for this project, and I'm just going to let this run. So this is land hidden in plain sight. This is Emmaus's offices in Bristol, funded by Homes England, and we just 3 months ago got planning approval for this. So we start on the roof, and these are the spaces between our homes, which are no corridors, just interconnecting courtyards. And then it'll zoom back out now and show that it's actually on a roof in the middle of Bristol on top of a building. All of these buildings are made of straw, timber, and chopped straw. And I won't go any further than that with that, because you can only listen to that kind of music for so long. And so this is our offices in Bristol. We also secure planning permission to put 13 homes on top of the roof. And the beauty of working with straw, it's light, it's super efficient, and we can deliver a means by which we can store carbon in our built environment and create a new sixth carbon sink. And that's where I will stop talking. I think I overran a little bit. Sorry about that.
Amazing. Thank you so much, Craig. There was so much rammed into that and so many brilliant different things. I really, really loved what you said about straw being carbon fiber. I think that needs to be on a t-shirt.
Oh, yes.
Hashtag.
Bio-evolved carbon fiber. Yes.
Amazing. Our next speaker is Cypren Edmunds. I will hand over to Cypren.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Thanks very much also to Barbara and Craig. Fascinating talks, scientific, historic, everything really taking in what my heart and head feels about straw. So I'm going to talk about straw at scale. And essentially, where I'm coming from is the person on the ground, Joe Public, Joe Blogs, and more specifically from the UK's perspective, although I would argue that this could be debated broadly around the world, but from my experience from the UK's perspective. So how do we create the buildings we need with the building regulations we have? Next slide, please. So my story essentially started with straw and watching grand designs. At about 2012, I was in a carpentry course in South Thames College in Southwest London, and enjoying it. And at the end of this course, we were given the option to go to the Future Build event, which takes place in London. And lo and behold, one of the people manning the stalls was Barbara Jones. And the reason why I recognised her is because she had featured on Grand Design on the programme, building the Straw-bale building. And I was just captivated by all of this. From what I could see from the programme, she was talking about the huge benefits that came with straw, and more specifically about the energy costs that the habitants would be able to take on board. Next slide, please. So in 1998, I was just coming off the back of training as an Olympic sprinter. And the reason why I'm bringing this up now is because we have the Tokyo Olympics, but it's quite appropriate and quite apt because I was considering, what am I going to do with my career once I've completed that? I went on to become a fitness trainer, and I did quite well at that. I went on to then train people within Wimbledon, which is where I was residing at the time, as a single parent. And I thought, right, okay, I need to change gear, change career, and do something differently. I didn't particularly like the way the industry was working, so I moved into music, and I worked with Soul Records, who are based in London, one of the country's top independent record stores and record labels, and I worked with them for a few years. And something that was really, really coming to bear was the place that I was living in was becoming even downgraded. So more specifically, we were having issues with damp and condensation. Next slide, please. So the Hyde Park estate is where I live, and the estate comprises of 654 dwellings, mixed tenure. The block that you can see in the background is the Marsh Court. In the lower on the right is the Trafalgar Pub, and on the left-hand side we have a 3-story tenants block as well. So it's a mixed tenure of leaseholders, freeholders, and social tenants. Next slide, please. As you can see from this slide, low rise and high rise are featured within the entire estate. Next slide, please. So mold and damp and condensation, where are we going with this? So how does that affect the average person? If you're living in a home where the fabric of the building is not really performing to the best of its ability, what you have is a very horrific position, especially if if you're a mother and father or even a single parent. It's very difficult for you as a family to reside within those 4 walls. Your feelings and your emotions become low, and if you can't, no matter how hard you try to get rid of that, if you can't get rid of it, you almost feel like you don't know where you're going from there. Next slide, please. So the picture that you can see here of some of the really typifies some of the dwellings on the Hyde Park estate, and the council opted to sell the stock onto the housing association to really get them to look after the repairs and maintenance of these properties. Next slide, please. The intention was to improve everybody's lives. The residents were sold the option of having new kitchens and bathrooms. All of the homes we brought up to decent home standard. But what we found were the contractors that were working within the procurement really didn't pick up on this. So next slide, please. It's unsurprising, therefore, that when you see homes looking like this and you're coming home and you're unable to entertain friends and family, you're going to feel low, generally speaking. Next slide, please. The estate, therefore, was put in for a regeneration, and we did so by a consultation. And as you can see, the red borderlines, because the pictures that I've installed on there are quite wide and varied, but the red lines that are on there take on board the borders of the estate. So the high rise on the second picture on the right-hand side takes on board the borders as well. So let's go to the next slide, please. So qualifying from South Thames College as a carpenter, I really wanted to push this on and to develop my skills. And what I found with Barbara and was a meeting of minds, really. And she and other people who we connected with wanted to push forward an organisation and develop it called Straw-bale Building UK. And I became a founder member of that organisation. And the aim of that group is to promote good practice within the industry. We comprise of builders, educators, advocates, and we really want to push on this message that straw is a good material to use. Next slide, please. One of the visits as a group was to go to Bath. You can see the bale house that Craig had highlighted in his presentation beforehand. I think in the picture we have Phil Christopher and Joe. And the whole point of going to this site was to really take on board how a living, breathing building can change people's lives. Next slide. We also went to Future Build, and more specifically, we demonstrated at Future Build. So in this slide, you can see Straw-bale, who are one of the organizations who are part of SB UK. And in the lower right-hand side, we have Jeffrey Hart, Jeffrey, otherwise known as Jeffrey the Natural Builder, and Eileen Sutherland, partner with Barbara at the School of Natural Building. So in essence, the message that we wanted to promote was to really get on board with straw in all shapes and all guises. So as you can see, the material that is being demonstrated there on the left-hand side is a straw panel. Next slide, please. So my point that I would like to really get across to everybody tonight is to how do we go from building from small scale, next slide please, to big scale. So I feel that at the moment we're at a crossroads, and as Craig pointed out just a moment ago, everybody seems to feel that the climate crisis is happening now. Well, hello, no, it hasn't just been happening now, it's been happening for some time. And we really need to get a move on to resolve the issues that we're currently experiencing. And one of the solutions that I propose and would like to put forward is that we really need to get on board with government. We really need to have those conversations with people in a central government and local government, for that matter, the civil servants, and really get them to understand what it is that we're trying to convey. Because some of the issues that we're having around straw is that it is really affecting or disturbing the current status quo. So you have the current set of builders who are building the estates around the UK are not really considering these kind of materials at all. And I feel that we need to all come together, big round table, so that we can have those conversations in an adult manner and see what we can do, see where the compromise is. Let's move forward to the next slide, please. So the example that I would put forward is the entrepreneurial state. This was a formula devised by the professor Mariana Mazzucato. She's a professor at UCL. And the point that is being conveyed in this present slide is that many people just don't understand how the iPhone began. And the point that's been illustrated here is that the iPhone really just didn't start with Steve Jobs and Apple. It started with people pitching forward ideas to government and government supporting it. And those small elements all then came together to make the iPhone what it is. So we need to really think broadly as a sector, natural materials sector, to work with government so that they can take on board these ideas that we have and see the positive outcomes in the long term. So next slide, please. So from small scale to large scale, again, this is Lilac in Leeds, another example of once again repeating what Craig had put forward in his presentation, straw panels. And it really demonstrates the possibilities you can have when you're working with straw. We really need to move ourselves away from the present ideas that we are having, because in the long term, I think we're just going to return to where we are at the moment if we're not taking this on board. Next slide, please. And one way of really developing on that idea is, as I was saying, was lobbying and being very specific to government. So I noted with some of the work that we were doing as an organisation, SB UK, our builders are working fantastically around the country. They are really taking on board their skills and developing and teaching people on their courses. But I felt that we needed to just veer more towards the political aspects and look at working with civil servants, look at working with the government committees, and one committee specifically called the Environmental Audit Committee put forward a question about sustainability of the built environment. SB UK put forward their evidence, as the call for evidence was put forward, we submitted ours, and this is one way of engaging with the process. If you don't engage with it, then you find yourself removed from it and people just won't talk to you. Next slide, please. So the opportunities that arise from that is that you then get to build on a bigger scale. Yes, the market is far more open for you to work with. The example given here is of a site in Switzerland. The panels or the building is formed around the ACAN model, very similar to ModCell. And ideally what we need to have in this country is to have a far more liberal and open-minded government to take this on board, and really to look at the opportunities and the benefits that come with that. We have COP26 coming at the end of this year. Let's see if they'll take that and as a signpost to move forward for the future. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Cypren. A really, really lovely message. We're running a little bit over, so we're going to keep on going through. Our next speaker is John Butler, who's done a lot of work looking at sort of the more academic side, I suppose, of the straw industry, and posed this really interesting question: is there enough straw? And I think we're going to get a pretty strong answer to that question. John, I'll hand over to you.
Hi, I think I'm kind of here as the numbers geek, which, oh, we've gone ahead, spoilers. There's a number of things I could have talked about, but I'm just going to focus on one thing because I can try and cram too much in. So the first, just to warn Farron really, the first few slides go through quite quickly and then hopefully slows down a bit. So is there enough straw? Next slide, please. Yes, brilliant. So hang on, let me get mine up so I know what's coming next. There we go. So the next question really is, yes, how much straw is there? And also lots. So that's brilliant. I probably need to look into that a bit more and figure out how much we can use for building. So next slide, please. Again, lots, there's plenty, so brilliant. We're getting where we need to be. Probably ought to sort of drill into the data a bit more and have a look at how many houses does that build. So next slide, please. Lots. I will get more sensible soon. You probably were hoping for a little bit more detailed information, and if you're anything like me, you'll be kind of wanting to know whether I can prove that. So next slide, please. Yes. Hopefully I will now go on to do that. Next slide, please. So this is those 3-bed semi-detached houses that Barbara showed earlier, the council houses in North Kesthaven. Before we can kind of figure out how many houses we can build, we need to look at how much straw there is in a single house. So you could build bigger houses with more straw or smaller houses with less straw, but just as a kind of starting point. So this one took 350 bales for each house. Those are your sort of standard small bales, so about 1 metre by 45 centimetres by 36 centimetres. And if those are good, sort of pretty dense construction bales, the average weight will be about 20.5 kilograms. And that then makes each house about 7.2 tonnes. Next slide, please. So to kind of start looking at how much straw there is, I dug up government data. They're very good at kind of keeping track of what's happening and getting answers out of farmers. We tried to get kind of some information directly from farmers as part of the Upstraw project, but they're very busy naturally. So government data is a lot more reliable and there's a lot more of it. So I looked at the last 10 years and took average results for the last 10 years. So firstly, looking at how much different grain crops are grown. These are thousands of hectares at the bottom. So for wheat, that's 1,800,000 hectares of wheat grown on average every year in the UK. And obviously much less oats and a reasonable amount of barley. I'll kind of focus on wheat because it's what we end up using mostly to build with, partly because there just is so much more of it around. Next slide, please. So this is, it looks like the same graph, but it isn't. That was hectares. This is the amount of grain produced in thousands of tons. And it follows the same pattern, only slightly further apart, because the yield per hectare is also least for oats and greatest for wheat. So wheat's quite an efficient crop. And so looking at the amount of grain again for wheat, you've got 14 million tons of wheat grown every year. So the last decade included some really good years for growing wheat and some really bad ones where the bad weather just came at all the wrong times and there were sort of reduced crops. So it's probably a reasonable estimate for potential future. But we obviously want to know about straw. So if I could have the next slide. To work out how much straw you get from the total yield, have to go to a slightly different government data set. For some reason, they all look at slightly different timescales. They don't quite match up. So the amount of straw grown and the amount of grain produced is from one time period, and the percentages of that straw come from a slightly different time period, but I've averaged them over the sort of biggest time that there was data available for, and then applied it to the 10-year average. But anyway, the point really is that for wheat, you get about 54% of the weight of the total production is straw. So if I have the next slide. This again looks like the same graph, but isn't. This is the amount of straw that's produced by each of these on average over the last 10 years. So again, focusing on wheat, we've got, it's thousands of tons, but that works out as sort of 7,651,000 tons of wheat straw every year. So there's loads of straw. And we could look at that and work out how many houses we could build from that. If I could have the next slide, please. So from that sort of 7.5 million tons of straw, your 7.18 tons of straw for a 3-bed house, that would give you 1,065,598 houses per year, which is a whopping great amount considering I think we currently basically build a handful of straw-bale houses in the UK every year. So we could say that. Next slide. But that comes with two massive assumptions. The first of which is that all of that straw is actually removed from the field in the first place. And the second is that all of that straw is available for us to use. And spoiler alert, it isn't. Next slide, please. This slide is slightly back to front, really. If you look at the right-hand side first, and the percentage of straw removed from field. So again, this is averaging government data over the last sort of 5 to 10 years, and focusing on wheat again. Of all the straw that's produced, all the wheat straw that's produced, 73% of it is taken out of the field, and the rest of it is ploughed back in and is good for soil improving. So moving to the left of the chart, that pie chart, home farm just means the farm of origin, the farm where the crop was grown and where the straw was harvested. So 41% of it is used for animal bedding and feed. 0.something% is burnt for biomass heating or on-site power generation, and 1% for mysterious other purposes. 57% of it of all straw is sold away from the farm of origin. So we could say, great, we can use that to build houses, but it's already sold. So somebody's already buying it. And the smaller pie sort of breaks that down. 7% of that goes to biomass energy, 12% for the mysterious other purposes, and 39% for feed and bedding, presumably animal feed and bedding. And it's been put to me a few times that we couldn't kind of scale up straw-bale building because biomass energy would consume all the available straw, but that's clearly not true because only 7% of that straw currently is going to biomass. Next slide, please. So I've kind of looked at where could we take straw from and not touch the biomass one, just for the sake of argument, really. And using a slightly nominal 5% figure just as a starting point. So a kind of minimal amount of straw that we could use, shaving just a little bit off the straw sold for other purposes and a little bit off the straw sold for feed and bedding. That sort of gives us that sort of reddish 5% wedge that we could use for building. And that amounts to 279,000 tons of straw every year, which again is quite a lot of straw. Next slide, please. So from that 5% of wheat that's removed, 5% of the wheat that's removed from fields, you get 279,000 tons. Divide that by the 7.18 tons per 3-bed house, and you've got 38,923 houses, at least, really, that we could build every year. And again, that figure would change slightly if you had a bigger house or a smaller house, but it's sort of a good estimate. And next slide, please. I want to stress that that's not the amount that we can build. That's sort of the bare minimum, really. So that we could start using other kinds of straw. If we use more barley straw, for instance, then there's a whole tens of thousands of houses we could build with that. We could increase the share of that straw that we use for building. If lots of people went vegan, you would have less need for animals and less need for animal bedding, so there would be more straw available. That's probably not an argument to get into now, but it would work. But anyway, just that nearly 39,000 houses amounts to about 18% of, or it's the equivalent of 18% of all the houses that were finished in the UK in 2019. So it's a really good chunk of houses. And again, we mostly just sort of build a handful of houses out of straw in the UK. So there's massive scope to increase that. So next slide. It does come with some caveats that there's all this straw theoretically available, but sometimes it can seem difficult to kind of get our hands on it. There are supply chain issues. Farmers don't make small bales as much these days. They're incredibly busy, and it basically takes a lot more time to make small bales. It's a lot easier for them to make the big bales that can be handled by machine. They don't have so much time for kind of straw bale builders to want to go and prod bales and stick their fingers in to see if they're dense and have a good look at them. So we need to kind of set up easier ways of connecting farming networks with construction networks, basically. We need systems set up that make it easier to get hold of straw and easier for farmers to provide it without it being something that's sort of an added draw on their time. We kind of need to make it beneficial to farmers somehow, I think, and then it will be easier to get hold of that straw. I think there's also a case for using kind of more chopped blown straw, a bit like filling panels with cellulose fibre. It just gets pumped in, or panels that are tightly packed with loose straw like Ecological, where there's a machine that you can take straw from any size bale, and that just removes that reliance on small bales. But next slide, please. Basically, though, is there enough straw? Yes, there's lots of it. We just need to work on the supply chain so we can get hold of it regularly, more easily. And in theory, the more, it's one of those slightly chicken egg thing, the more demand there is for it, the easier it will be to build a supply chain. But then the more there's a supply chain, the easier it will be to get it adopted. So we sort of need to work at both ends. And then just one very last slide, which is just so you can see where I got all the information from. And that's the end of mine. Thank you.
Amazing. Thank you so much, John. And I hope I speak for lots of people when I said we really enjoyed this nerdy little interlude. It's been really fantastic to zoom out for a second and have a look at the industry more broadly. Brilliant. I hope everyone's ready for some more. We're now going to go into the final bit of the talks for this evening, which is 3 wonderful case studies from a variety of different speakers. So first, we're going to welcome back Phil, who was one of our speakers from our event last month. And Phil is going to talk us through his absolutely fantastic project, the Bale House. So Phil, I'll hand over to you.
Brilliant. Thank you, Emma. And thank you to everybody who's spoken so far. Some great stuff to see. Brilliant. Next slide, please. Okay, yes, so this is the Bale House, which is a visitor centre which has been built at Hastings Country Park in Hastings in East Sussex. And I'm proud to say that it's been built by a consortium of Straw-bale building UK members, lots of different people involved on this project. Next slide, please. And so the funding for this project has come from the Interreg Upstraw project that we've heard some information about so far this evening, partially funded by them and also then part funded by Hastings Borough Council, who are the client for the job. Next slide, please. So here we are, and we're going to go whistle stops straight through lots and lots of pictures to show you different parts of the building. So this is the finished entrance to the building. You can see a very exciting steel, corten steel sculpture on the right-hand side of those big entrance doors. Next slide, please. So this is a country park. There are lots of different designations on the land. It was really difficult to get the project through planning. It's basically, there were lots and lots of different restrictions, and there was lots of rounds going through planning to actually get to the building that we were able to build. Next slide, please. So here are the groundworks that happened on the site. So the site is basically, you can see the sea off in the background there. So we're basically 155 meters up. We're a few hundred yards from the edge of a cliff. And this is very heavy clay and sand going to sandstone and mudstone, which was really interesting trying to dig everything out. And we needed some really big kit to actually get the foundations done for the building. Next slide, please. And those foundations were made up of, we used some recycled concrete blocks along with lime mortar. We used some car tire foundations. We had some foam glass gravel, both in the cavity fill and also creating the underfloor, the layers of the floor of the building. Next slide, please. And on top of our sort of about 300 mil of foam glass gravel in the floor, along with lots of geogrid for stabilization and geotex. We then had a 100 mil limecrete screed that went on top, which gave us a lovely, perfectly flat floor to work off for the next stage of the building. Next slide, please. Which is all the framing. So we were careful to try and source sustainable UK timber wherever we possibly could. The majority of the timber in the building is southern UK grown Douglas fir and larch. You can see the big round posts that we've got there in the bottom right picture are larch. The other beams are all Douglas fir, quite chunky Douglas fir beams you can see down in that picture on the bottom right. Next slide, please. And then the roof, and this was not local timber, this was sort of Baltic birch ply that went on the roof, but it looks very, very, very good, and it was certified. And it's a big old roof. So the internal floor area of the building is about 216 square meters. This roof overall is about 350 square meters, I think, with big canopies over hanging on the south side, which helps to let the winter sun in, but keep the summer sun out. Next slide, please. We've seen lots of fairly sunny pictures, but it was a really difficult site to work on. The weather could almost be like this in the middle of summer, like now. It was because you were literally in the cloud because you were so high up. And we ended up, because the roof took longer than we were hoping it was going to take, we got backed into the end of a year a bit before we could do the straw and the rest of the roof. So we ended up having to put a hat on the building to be able to carry on working in the dry. And that worked very well, which was good. But it's an incredibly exposed site. By this point, towards the end of 2019, we'd had 60, 70 mile per hour winds on at least 2 or 3 occasions, I think. Next slide, please. So then we're ready for the straw. So once we had all the frame up, next slide, please. Lots of straw. This straw was actually stored because it took such a long time to build the building. To get everything through planning and get everything ready. This was dry stored in a barn down the road for about 3 years, I think. And actually 95% of it was absolutely fine and really, really good quality, which was great. So we did have a little extra added bonus amount of straw as well that we needed to use. And it was about nearly 500 bales in total that we used. Next slide, please. There you can see the bale stations that we've got set up. I think that's probably Chris and Dave from Auckland and the rest of the team that we had there. You can see our plates for doing the compression out in the back. You can see that from looking in the background there, you can see basically what we did here because it was such an exposed site. We needed to keep the weather out and we needed to keep the roof on. What we decided to do was we did a kind of a hybrid lightweight timber frame. Basically, the framing is very much as you would do for load-bearing straw, but there are more posts. It was then able to take the weight to the roof and everything is plugged together very securely. And then we do this a lot now, and then you just compress the straw into the frame, basically using over on the right-hand side there, you can see the steel plates down on the ground. So you go up to, these were 7 bales high, we went up to 6 bales high, you compress on the 6th bale and then squeeze the one in the top and then let the compression off. Next slide, please. And there we go. You can see a picture of the compression taking place. So we actually super compressed it into here. It's very, very tight. That's Jonathan Kalviak there giving it some welly on the ratchet straps. Next slide, please. And that's a picture of one of the finished walls leading up to the curve on the south side, just about ready for a trim. Next slide, please. And that's the team that we had there for doing the straw. Lots and lots of lovely people there. I've name checked a couple of them. We've got Boise, Hasmazali, Mary Rawlinson from Green Castle as well. Lots of great people. Next slide, please. And that's where we left it at the end of 2019. That was where we went off for our Christmas break. Next slide, please. Then we came back and we did the roof. It was, again, the weather was so foul. January last year, it was really grim. It was so wet on site that the water was condensing on the underside of the tin hat, and actually then still raining onto the roof. It was really bad. This is actually for cost reasons. There's a polystyrene roof effectively with a single ply membrane on top. Lots and lots of Velux roof windows on there as well, which have blinds in. Next slide, please. And then we had the render going on. So we can see this is the render on the south side of the building. So 2 sides of this building are then clad with timber. And then the north and the east side are line rendered. Next slide, please. That's a picture of some of the internal walls being plastered. Next slide, please. And then we moved on to the rest of the internal fit out. So over on the right-hand side there is what's going to become the kitchen. And then the toilet cubicles and things there leading up to the entrance door on the left-hand side. Next slide, please. And then we hit COVID last year, of course, which caused some complications. And we chose to send everybody home to be with their families for that first initial lockdown. So we were off site for quite some considerable time, unfortunately. In total, I think it was about 15 months that we spent on site for this job in total. So then we came back in July and then we did, next slide, please. We did the floor. So this is a breathable epoxy finish. It's a very thin epoxy finish on the limecrete floor, which gives it a very, very hard wearing finish. Next slide, please. And then lots of cladding. So this is Douglas fir cladding, which we had pre-treated with a product called, depending on how you want to pronounce it, and I've heard lots of different ways, CX, or we always called it SOO because it sounded easier, SIOOX, which is a Scandinavian product which helps the wood silver very quickly, sort of through a chemical process, a non-toxic chemical process, rather than sort of oxidation. Next slide, please. There we can see the rendered walls on the outside. We can see the lovely larch turn posts that are at each end of the building and down the central spine of the building. And a commercial deck that we've got there. That was a big old deck to lay. That's actually using Malia turnip, I think, with the grippy stuff. Next slide, please. Then lots of painting. So inside and outside, we used a graphenstone paint, which you may have heard of graphenstone. So this is this new highly acclaimed and awarded new paint, which actually is a lime-based paint, but contains graphene. So it makes it really, really tough. And the product that we used here is supposed to be pretty much a decent scrubbable finish. And they do it in custom colors. And we've used this creamy color inside and that more yellow ochre color on the internal walls and on the outside of the building. Next slide, please. Lots and lots of other Douglas fir and timber used inside for finishing off the rest of the building. There's an example of the skirting there and the window boards and all these different things, and the linings around the doors and the windows were all done in big chunky Douglas fir that were then finished with an Osmo wax. Next slide, please. This is the forecourt, which again is a huge area on the north side of the building. And this was done with a big sort of geocell area underneath filled with shingle, so that basically this is a self-binding gravel on top, which means that the whole area will absorb water and take it into a French drain, which runs around the building and then runs off into a very significant swale on the inner field to the south side of the building. The important thing to note about this is that the entire building was done to be completely level access. So everything that you can see here is basically finished floor level. So apart from the slight slope from the car park coming down into the site, everything is at finished floor level in and around the site for the forecourt, the decking, the floor inside, everything around it. So it's all really accessible. Next slide, please. We've got Vern there sorting out the disabled toilet and fitting bits and pieces in there. So there's lots and lots of other internal fit out to do to get everything sorted out. Next slide, please. This is a momentous day when we managed to get the entrance doors fitted, and you can see some lovely, might be able to make out some lovely decals there on the glass, which are supposed to, which obviously could signify some straw. Next slide, please. And there we go, some finishing touches, panels around the doors and windows, so the entrance doors in the lobby. Next slide, please. That's a picture of the finished building inside. Next slide, please. That's again what the building looks like outside, and the next slide is the south side of the building. So this is pointing towards the sea. And I think that's it. I think it's my final slide. Brilliant. Next slide. There we go. Oh, that's great. Bless you. Thank you very much. Sorry, I did slightly overrun in the end, but we're nearly there. Thank you. Such
a beautiful project, Phil, and it really deserves all of the admiration and awards and everything that it's getting. It's been, yes, it's really nice to see that process. And, you know, every construction project has challenges, but sometimes, yeah, it's nice just to get the comfort that everyone puts up with the same rubbish.
Thank you.
And lovely as well to hear, you know, all of those different products and like the diversity and the lengths that you went to with the natural materials. I'm sure we'll be getting you back to talk about some of those other things in future. But yeah, thank you so much for sharing. I'm now going to hand over to Dana Olărescu, who's going to talk about her project, May Project Classroom. And I'm personally really looking forward to hearing about this one. So Dana, take it away.
Thank you. Okay, thanks so much for the invitation. I'm super humbled to be sat in this panel, and I have a huge disclaimer. I am not an architect, so please take everything with a pinch of salt. Next slide, please. Yeah, so I'm a socially engaged artist, and I'm really interested in bridging the gaps between social and environmental injustice. And last year, alongside social designer Paulina Sidholm and carpenter David Murray, we were commissioned by May Project Gardens to build an outdoor low-impact classroom. And we were incredibly keen to really learn how to work with natural materials, but also to do it in an environment that was really conducive to learning and where this knowledge could be shared and democratized. Next slide, please. Thank you. So I'll just tell you a tiny bit about May Project Gardens. They're an incredible grassroots organization that's based in South London. It's set up by Ian Solomon Kawal, whom you can see on the left-hand side of the screen. And so the garden, it's his garden, it's his own residential garden, which he opened up to the community. And so for the past 15 years, they've been engaging underserved communities who live nearby to be reconnected with nature through things such as learning how to grow food. The garden is a permaculture site. And they also work with young people who come from backgrounds of serious violence, and also more recently with young refugees and asylum seekers. Next slide, please. So this is the shed that we actually took down, so as to make space for this outdoor classroom. And so we were interested in a few things. So we kind of had this interrogation of sustainable, low impact building principles, but also we wanted to look into the ethics of construction. So really from like growing, manufacturing, handling, and also the cradle to grave cycle. And we were interested in a couple of things. So we wanted in the physical side, so we really wanted to respect nature, so really learn how to work alongside nature. The social reality of the location, so we wanted to privilege community experiences. Cultural specificity, which was really important to us, so we really wanted to embed different cultural perspectives into the fabric and into the aesthetic of the building. And also we wanted to prove that in the same similar way of growing organic food in your back garden, natural building can also be possible, especially within the constraints of a council-owned site. And we actually did it under permitted development. So when we were looking at natural materials at first, we were actually looking at cob, and then we went to Future Build, where we saw Barbara Jones deliver an amazing presentation, and we were absolutely stunned by the power of straw, but also just by her dedication to it. So we started reading up on it, and we decided it was going to be our main material. So then we worked with an engineer and the carpenter to co-design and to build the house, and we actually asked Barbara for consultation, and that's really when we also found out how generous the Straw-bale network really is. Next slide, please. So this was the first day when we took down the shed, and this is the group of boys I worked with, sort of the main group of boys. They were incredible because they come from Ethiopia, Eritrea, and Sudan, and they were already incredibly familiar with vernacular types of building because they'd worked alongside their dad since they were about 5. But they also kept laughing at us throughout and just telling us that you don't really need tools to be building things, and things like, you know, you need building is about using your brains, not your muscles. Next slide, please. So one of the young people was actually born in a hut that's similar to this one in South Sudan. And we really wanted to replicate a structure where, one, they would feel safe because they actually get stopped and searched by the police about 5 times a day in London. But also we wanted to obviously use local materials from the UK that they could also kind of feel, have a familiarity for. Next slide, please. So what we really did is we partner up with a community interest company called Volunteer It Yourself, which actually helped us gain certificates for the young people who are involved in this build. So they actually gained carpentry, health and safety, and painting certificates, which is amazing because, again, the academic curriculum in the UK doesn't really give them access to anything like this. Next slide, please. Oh yeah, so it wasn't just these young people who are having fun on the site, but it was also we did allow children, and I think that's something really important to highlight. That obviously when we were really careful about keeping the sharp tools away, and this is actually Paulina's daughter Maya, who kept coming to inspect us and really was acting like a proper project manager. But I think for us it was incredibly important to see that children could also participate and actually influence the design, the final design of the building. Next slide, please. So I wanted to show you our foundation. So after we dug, which I think you saw earlier, we covered the trenches with gravel, which was tamped. And then on top of this gravel, we actually used railway sleepers. So these are literally just standing on the top of the gravel. And on the right-hand side of the screen, you can see the outside frame. And on the bottom side, you can actually see the entire foundation. And it was funny that it ended up looking, at this stage at least, like a beautiful Japanese garden. Next slide, please. Some of the materials that I really wanted to show. So we were so pleased to also be working with Hazel. And again, within this incredibly generous Straw-bale network, we partner up with Wrongs Covered, which is woodland restoration project in Norwich. So they actually came down in person to deliver the hazel to us because they really wanted to see the permaculture side and meet the young people. And then we also use recycled foam glass to fill in the trenches. Next slide, please. One thing, I guess this probably shows you the final the final picture of how the foundations actually looked like. We knew that we were going to struggle with keeping the bales straight, so we actually created some guides on the sides of the building so as to help ourselves. Next slide, please. And this is when the straw bales arrived. We found a local farmer who was super, super excited to actually be working on a project like this, and he was really keen to receive photos. But when he arrived, the neighbors obviously saw it as a huge hazard, fire hazard. And what really helped us on the day was the fact that the next door builders who were working just on just a normal house extension came out and jumped in the straw bales and told everyone that it really reminds them of home. So that sort of alleviated the anxieties of the neighbors. I also wanted to show you that, as fun as it was, I did not learn to use long sleeves. So maybe that's a tip I could share with everyone, because you do get a rash every now and then if you have sensitive skin. Next slide, please. So this is when we actually raised the walls. It was an incredible day because it only took half a day to do it. We did have it as an open day, so we invited everyone who wanted to participate, and we obviously also work with the young people. What was brilliant about it was that everyone got designated a section of the wall, which actually meant that now when the building is ready, they can still remember it, and they know they have an imprint in the building. And because some of the bales did sort of shift within the I suppose during the time, you can also see where there are certain lumps or dents as well, which is quite nice and organic. Next slide, please. And then this is just, again, us on that day. I think it looks, I just wanted to show you this because I think it looks like we're in Tuscany, but really we are in South London, and it was an incredible day in September. Next slide, please. So then our walls were lime rendered. This is where one of Barbara's old students, I believe, so a graduate of the School of Natural Building, Ju Sota, came to really do some amazing workshops and really teach us how to do both lime rendering on the outside and clay plastering on the inside. Again, we kept this open, so we allowed people to come in and help. And I think what was really wonderful about learning how to use lime is that obviously it's breathable, but also it absorbs and releases moisture. So it also keeps the adjacent materials, it protects them. It's obviously more eco-friendly because the lime manufacturing process produces less carbon dioxide than ordinary cement. And it's also flexible, antifungal, and exceptionally durable. At that point, we did our budget was running low, so we didn't actually get a paddle mixer, which actually meant that we used a bathtub, and all of us were taking turns in mixing lime. Next slide, please. this is where you can see how the house was starting to take shape. And I think what was wonderful for us, we were having these open Sundays where every single person could actually come and either interrogate or help. But I think what was really amazing for us was, again, just having the ability to democratize this knowledge and allow people to participate as much or as little as they wanted to, even if that meant that it was a bit more difficult for us to sort of manage the day. Next slide, please. And this is just Lime render, so in 2 different phases. And it's funny because we actually prefer the one on the left-hand side, which is not the actual finish. We just thought it had a nice character to it, but the end finish is kind of like a normal fine line. Next slide, please. And this is clay plastering, where the young people returned. It was incredibly fun, and again, I think. We learned to use with clay. We learned to work with clay, and again, I think we learned that it dries naturally, unlike gypsum, which actually dries chemically. It's fully biodegradable. We actually had fun trying to remove it off the wall if we really weren't finished. If we weren't happy with the finish, just kind of wet it and put it back again. And again, using a product that was completely waste-free was incredible. We did quite a few coats, and we were, the amount of cracking was disappointing every time, but we just kept at it. And after I think the fourth coat, we were finally happy with it. Next slide, please.
Dan, I'm just going to give you a little warning. We're coming to the end of the window now. Just finishing now. This is again, the same group kept coming to do the coats, so it was amazing to see how these friendships were sort of aligning. Next slide, please. We also decided not to have any shelves, but we did make this little alcove just literally by removing half of a bale and then using clay as well, so you can see the finished product. Next slide. The most beautiful thing that happened to us was that a local young person from Afghanistan actually told us that this building reminds him of home so much that he actually remembers who he is when he sees it, as opposed to normal buildings in South London. Next slide, please. And we also worked with someone who built their own solar panels, who is going to come and teach the young people how to do it as well. And obviously this is what the classroom will do. We'll continue to facilitate these sort of workshops. Next slide. And this is the opening party. This is what the house looks like now. Next slide, please. Again, this is the interior. Next slide, please. Yeah, this is again the same opening party. Next slide, please. And finally, we were just really humbled that we had the opportunity to do this. I think Barbara warned us at the beginning that we were going to make loads of mistakes, and I think we made even more than she anticipated. But we were so happy that we actually had the privilege to work not only with straw, but also work during the pandemic, to be in nature and to actually learn how to work against the rainy season. And I think the most incredible part is that now the classroom is finished, and it's not just this group of young people who's going to benefit from it and who will continue to run classes there, but also hopefully many generations from now on. So thank you so much. Brilliant, thank you. What a fantastic story, and the community involvement and the openness of the build that was facilitated by the means of construction is just so beautiful to see. Yeah, such a wonderful tale. We are up to our final speaker. I'm going to welcome Jo in just one moment. I know that we are very close to the end of our 2-hour window. What we are hoping to do is we'll hear from Jo, and then we'll have a very quick, maybe 10-15 minute Q&A, just to get a couple of the big pressing questions that have come up a lot in the chat. Jo, do you want to take it away?
Great, thanks, Emma. That was a wonderful talk. Thank you very much for sharing that one. It's so lovely to see community-focused events like that. I think that's one of the real strengths to working with these materials, is how easy it is to kind of get that accessibility within a community. It's yeah, wonderful project. Right, I know we're running quite far behind, so I'm going to do a little whistle-stop tour for you. This is our current project. It's half built at the moment. It is a small single-story family home that we're building in a garden for our client and her 3 young boys. Next slide, please, and the next one. So this is a bit of an interesting one for us. We've been building with straw for a little while. We've done load bearing and classic infill, and this one came along, and it's called the CUT technique, CUT. Next slide, please. So that stands for cells under tension. It's a French technique that was kind of developed about 20 years ago, I think. I'm not sure exactly how common it is over there. It's not very common over here. And it's kind of a hybrid system in that it removes some of the structure that you'd normally have with timber framing and replaces it with the bales, but maintaining some of the load bearing from the bales and the timber shared. Next slide, please. So this diagram, thank you very much to the Straw-bale Building Europe program, the Baobology. So this is actually from ESBG, the European Straw-bale Gathering in 2015. Some nice images from that, which I have stolen shamelessly. So you can see on the right hand side there, you've got some bales laid, and you've got 1 post per bale, which is an unusually high volume of posts to bales. With a standard infill system, you'd normally have larger openings with the bales, and then the bigger posts supporting the weight of the roof. So what this does is it shares the load and compresses the cells, in this case the straw, between the actual uprights. And one of the cardinal sins with straw-bale building is with this one, you actually cut the strings on the bales, allowing them to expand into the gap between the posts, which is mildly terrifying as a prospect, because we're very careful as straw-bale builders to treat the bales and the strings with extreme respect, never lifting them with the strings themselves, so that we can maintain the density and the structure of the bale. Yeah, we haven't actually got to this stage yet. I have mild trepidation. The way it goes in is you put a row of straw bales down, and then you put a batten across the top of that row and compress that down into the straw and attach it into your posts. And then you continue building up until you get to the top of your roof space. Next slide, please. So you can see that small graphic there where you've got the posts, in this case, are on the outside of the building. Quite often they're on the middle of the bale wall. We have a similar build up on this structure. Next slide, please. And so you can see a mock-up that they've done there. Again, this was for the Straw-bale Gathering in 2015, which shows the bale with very thin posts and what's probably a wood fibre cladding on the outside of that, with the rail that's about to be compressed down into the straw. So we got the design from this. We inherited this project due to COVID problems with the original builder. This has been ready to build for a couple of years now, and they couldn't do it. They had to go back to France to continue with looking after their family in the pandemic. So it was ready to go. So we've jumped in to help the client out. Next slide, please. So this particular job is a assisted self-build. So this is very much a self-build project, and we're just coming in to help out, and we're using a lot of volunteers to do that. So we've got a small number of experts on site helping to build it. And the first thing we had to do was measure up and make sure that we got everything working properly to the plans. Next slide, please. So the bales that we have, bales are a woefully inconsistent medium, which means that you can get a very basic standardization that you know you're going to build with. But once you get your actual bales from your supplier, then you might need to tweak your design to fit it. So in this case, in this picture, you can see that we're just setting up some test posts, because we need all of our post spacings to fit the bales that we have, not the bales to the posts. This is very specific for this way of building, to make sure that you get the rigidity and the density in the structure. Next slide, please. So to get them in, you want the post space to be slightly smaller than your actual bale size. So you have to put it in at an angle and then drop it down and make sure you've got that tension in. So that's what our willing students here are doing. Next slide, please. Once we'd set all of that up, we could fly around and pop up all of our posts, which was actually very quick. Once you've got all the planning done, it's very quick. We got all of our external framing up, and then it was time for the internal framing. Next slide, please. So we've got a beautiful bit of Douglas fir again, a very popular species. It grows locally to this job in Frome. So this came from just a few miles away from site, which is fantastic for the low carbon. And then it had this huge glulam beam, which you can see just to the bottom of the picture there, which is glulam is a laminated timber. So it's a really good way to get very, very strong timber to span, in this case, a 10-meter span. Next slide, please. So you can see it there from above. It's a really long span going right the way across the building, and that has to drop into our tenons on the top of our roundwood and will be supporting our roof. Next slide, please. Pretty scary job lifting that. It was about 380 kilos. And so we had two of these wonderful genie lifts, which is like a ratchet powered forklift. It's fantastic. So we used one of those. Next slide, please. And there it was, sitting in beautifully. It was a very tense situation getting that in, but we got it in. I had slightly too much coffee beforehand, which didn't help my agitation. But despite my fidgeting, we got it all in. Next slide, please. Which meant it was time for our box beams to go in. So we've got quite large spans, and in this particular system, we're using straw in the roof as an insulation as well as in the walls. So these box beams have been designed by an engineer to span our very large distances, 4 or 5 meters. So it's using the minimum amount of timber, and it's also using insulation cellulose in this instance to create a very strong, rigid box beam that's the same depth as our straw bales. So we can just slot a straw bale in between them. You see at the bottom edge there a small rail that's there to catch our bales as they go in, but they should be under tension as well. Next slide, please. So I think this might work. This should be a small time lapse if you want to play a brief moment of it, if it'll let you. I'm not sure it'll have done anything when it transferred it through to Google Drive. Doesn't matter.
If we can get it up, Joe, maybe we can come back to it if we keep going.
Yeah, don't worry, that's fine. We probably don't have the time anyway. So the straw bales then are just slotting in between. If you can go on to the next slide, please. There we go. So you can see the bales starting to go in there. We're actually using barley here because I think, as John mentioned in the chat earlier, the winter wheat crop has been failing the last couple of years, or has been very poor because of climate change. So we use barley here, which is still a good insulator. It's just not quite as resilient as wheat. Next slide, please. After the straw, we've got a wood fiber sarking board, which is going over the top to give us a bit more extra insulation and also to minimize the thermal bridging that we're getting from the rafters. Following that by our waterproof membrane. Next slide. Next slide again. And then that's with the counterbatten on. So on this particular building, we've got two distinct roofs. We've got a green roof going on one side and a profile metal sheet with solar panels going on the other side. So this is what it looks like from underneath, with our beautifully hairy roof starting to go in there. Once this is all finished, we are going to spray that with clay, which is going to seal it and is going to give it some fire protection as well. Next slide, please. So this is our super technical implementation that we use. Straw, as I said, is inconsistent. We need to compress it into sites. So we use what we call our persuader. This is the Mark 4000 edition. And you apply the bonk end to the straw and it compresses it wonderfully. I think that Craig will get one of these in the post at some point and he can really move to the next level. Next slide, please. So this is the both sides finished. This was just a couple of weeks ago. We were battling the ridiculous weather. So one week we had incredible thunderstorms and the next week we had 38-degree weather on the roof and had to move to a siesta time of working hours, which was pretty challenging, but we got it in. Next slide, please. So then we've got last little bits of framing going on and you can see all of the posts there ready to go. And next slide, please. I'm not sure, this was a little stop motion animation as well, which I don't think has worked. Never mind. So that was just to indicate how the straw is going into the walls. So imagine that's got straw in it and looks like a wall and you've nailed it. Next slide, please. The next thing we've done is we've actually dug quite a lot of heavy clay out of the foundations, which we've stored in some bulk bags. and we did some field tests just last week to see what our clay composition is. This is a simple field test that you do called the shake test, where you add water to the clay, to the soil, into a jar and shake it vigorously and then allow it to settle. And the heaviest and largest aggregates settle to the bottom first within the first kind of few seconds. So you can see that first line at the bottom there is showing where the sand particles are. As you go up, the particles get smaller, going through finer grained sand into silt. And then that big top wedge is actually clay. Which is really good. So we know we've got very clay-rich soil, which means that we can mix that up and we can use that either for lime stabilized clay plaster on the external face of the building or our clay plaster internally. So like I say, this is a live project. We're still doing it at the moment. We're going to be doing the straw is going in the walls in a couple of weeks' time. So if you want to follow the project, you can have a look at that on our Instagram page. If you do the next slide, please. So follow us at Hartwyn Builds and you can watch all of that go in. This again is being done with volunteers, so we can try and upskill. We're trying to focus on contractors and upskilling people who want to work in the industry, as well as just people who want to do a self-build. And a small plug, next slide please. I'm also speaking in some good company on Saturday at the European Straw-bale Gathering UK edition, which is happening on Saturday during the day. So if you want more hot straw action, tune in. Thank you very much.
Amazing, Joe. I was going to plug that in a second for people who'd enjoyed this evening, but yeah, really recommend checking out the programme this weekend. If today hasn't been enough for you, there's so many different wonderful things going on. And I know that so many of our speakers are there as well. One other quick plug, our natural materials group, if you're interested in joining, if you're interested in getting involved in the next coming months, we'll have our next event the first Thursday of September, which I believe is the 2nd of September. And that will be looking at myth busting, so starting to unpick sort of myths around natural materials and starting to challenge them. And we will, after the August ACAN summer break, we'll be getting back to meeting every Thursday at 7 p.m. So drop us an email at Natural Materials Architects Can if you'd be interested in getting involved, and we can add you to our WhatsApp group. So we have ruthlessly run over time, but I would really like to just keep the speakers here for a couple more minutes, and we're just going to run through one or two of the questions that have come up in the chat, because we really can't miss that, can't stop the evening before we've asked some of these questions. So I'd invite everyone from our panel of brilliant speakers to chip in. Following on from what Joe was just talking about sort of bringing in contractors and volunteers into the build and supporting upskilling across the industry. One question that's come up a few times is how can builders learn? And is there any work being done at the moment to get traditional and natural building techniques on construction course curriculums? Does anyone want to put some thought to that? Barbara?
Yeah, through the School of Natural Building, we've actually been working on this for several years, and we're working with the Construction Industries Training Board to do just that through the heritage route, interestingly. And what we try to emphasize is that natural building and working on heritage buildings is really similar. We've done quite a lot of extensions on listed buildings in straw, and they're starting to understand that working with lime, straw, clay and timber is actually very, very similar to working with heritage buildings, which are built of stone and lime and brick and lime, and are also breathable. So we're hoping that within the next year, we'll have quite a breakthrough with the accreditation. And we've just taken over a college in Todmorden, and we'll be starting to run indoor training workshops as well as our traditional outdoor training workshops on real building sites. And the idea is that we'll eventually dovetail into further education colleges and the NVQ courses, and get these as a module within other sorts of construction, so that you can go to college and learn a bit of carpentry and a bit of plumbing and electrics and a bit of natural building as well.
Yeah.
that's what we're hoping for.
Yeah, the work that Barbara and the School of Natural Building is doing dovetails fantastically with a lot of other really good training providers who are doing things commercially. Like there's a lot of suppliers like Mike Y or Timur or places like that that are running excellent courses on different aspects of this. One of the things that we're hoping to do is help signpost to those excellent providers. We don't need to reinvent the wheel, they're doing excellent work. But one of the things that's missing quite a lot is the experience between doing a course and being employable within the industry. And that's something that we're going to be working on. So we're going to be speaking with SNAB and with other people to see what the best route is to that, and hopefully cooperate with people like Phil and maybe Craig as well, to bring these opportunities through to people who are interested, because this is definitely a growth market, as Cypren was saying earlier. So there's a lot of work to do, but there's never been more people around the table than there is right now. So it's a really exciting time.
Amazing. Such a nice positive note sort of as we get towards the end. Another topic that's come up both in the chat here but also in our conversations in our group meetings is the role of regenerative agriculture in growing natural materials. And Geraldine has asked, can we discuss pesticides and herbicides in those bales? And I know, Dana, you mentioned getting sort of a rash off the straw, and that can be an issue of non-organic straw being used in projects. Are any of you sort of aware of big projects being done to promote sort of organic growing in straw? Barbara?
It's a very interesting subject, and to be quite honest, there's very little pesticide and fertilizer residue left in the straw by the time we come to use it. Ecological have done quite a lot of testing. They test all the straw that they use, which is, none of it is organic straw, and they would reject any straw that still had detectable residues in it, but none of it does. And farming practices are very different now than they were 5 or 10 years ago, when everyone was over fertilizing and over pesticiding things. And it's not in farmers' interests to overdo things. And most of the stuff that they use is actually disappeared from the crop by the time you come to use it. So you do get prickles on your arms, and it's not necessarily from fertilizers and pesticides, it's just from the material itself. We've just been baling our organic straw, and I've got prickles on my arms, organic hay, sorry, not straw. And I've still got prickles on my arms from that. And there's definitely no pesticides in it.
Craig?
So we did a life cycle analysis of the bale house at Bath, and with not so much about pesticides, but actually field runoff. And it was the only thing in the life cycle analysis that was negative, because it causes, with excessive use of fertilizers, it causes in life cycle analysis something called eutrophication, which is the over-enriching of water courses causing algal blooms and things like that. But it is relatively small. So if there are technical things about life cycle analysis, which once you're using it for straw, the life cycle analysis impact has to go to where the value is generated. So in pure LCA terms, it's the wheat germ that comes off the straw that bears, so our daily bread bears the impact, and that straw being a co-product or byproduct in pure life cycle analysis means the impacts are relatively low, because you're using it as a not as a primary crop, but as a byproduct and co-product. So those are fairly technical things, but the only thing we found was that eutrophication remains an issue, but that's about farming practice. And as Barbara said, farming practices are constantly changing and getting more and more regulated to remove some of the impacts that emerge from our agricultural systems. So that's in pure terms, the straw as a co-product and byproduct has less impact associated with it.
John, jump in.
Just a quick techie point following on from what Craig was saying. because we've been getting an environmental product declaration for UK straw developed. It's not finished yet, but one of the things that's accounted for is eutrophication. I'm second guessing whether I've said it right. And just having a look at it's very much a draft EPD at the moment, but the freshwater eutrophication, which I think is kilograms of, you've got phosphorus, I think, and nitrogen, but it's one of those, it's written in kind of science speak, so, but it's kind of 0.0000 something
very small
kilograms. So it's very
really
low,
low.
basically. It's
very small.
We'll be sharing this as soon as it's verified externally, and then you can put figures on all these things, so that it's not just us saying yes, it's low. You can look at it and it's properly low.
It's probably more dangerous to use some of the COVID sprays that are on sale at the moment.
Yeah, I just add one tiny thing before we move on to the next question. There's a lot of really interesting work being done by regenerative farmers like James Rebanks in Cumbria. There's a lot of the young farmers are coming through, and they're kind of adopting a lot of heritage farming techniques. They're going back to old field systems, away from monocrop and monocultures. I think there's going to be a really interesting space developing where, especially with the impetus of climate change, where the vulnerability of these large-scale crops like wheat are going to be more and more. We've seen it fail or be problematic for 2 years running now. So I think there's going to be quite a lot of movement just born out of necessity within that industry. And I think, as people were saying earlier today, looking at the network between construction industry and the farming industry and how those two can start cooperating using bio-based materials, that's where the sweet spot is. And there's movement on both directions already. We just need maybe a little bit more of a formal network to be put in place there. But yeah, again, it seems relatively hopeful, certainly more so than it has done for the last kind of 10 years.
Fingers crossed. One final question before we call it a night. We've got, what funding routes would you suggest for private straw-bale homes? Ellen says, I only know of one mortgage provider and their interest rate is much higher than conventional building materials.
Yes, I think that's true. Until we get to a point where we're building a lot more straw houses, it's still somewhat difficult to get finance. And that's why lots of people are choosing to go down the self-build route, where they can manage to do it without needing finance. But we need to be at a position where your direct line companies are going to be financing the straw, and it's mostly about lack of awareness and ignorance, and just not enough houses out there yet. It's not because they don't perform; they actually perform much better than the modern houses that are being built. But the mainstream industry doesn't know that yet; it doesn't have the confidence to back it. But it's coming, and it will get there. We're just not quite there yet.
Bill?
Yeah, just to add to that, a lot of those things as well revolve around standards. So all of this great information that we've got coming together to actually prove how straw works and how the different systems work is only going to help with those people like lenders to actually make sure that they will then lend, to let things become, a standard specification of building. It's all going to help push us towards more easy lending and things like that.
Cypren, then Craig.
I concur with everything else that everyone else has said just now. I think the finance sector has got to get to grips with all of this. I think there's a lot of ignorance within it, and understandably, it's not down to being blind in terms of that ignorance, but they just haven't heard of some of the innovation that's happening. And I think it was even more recently again, I'm quoting the Environmental Audit Committee, one of the witnesses said that in terms of natural materials being taken seriously and on board with insurance companies, I'm talking about the big players, she felt genuinely that there was an issue within that. We need to get that across, and again, as Phil was pointing out just a moment ago, that the technical guide and other heavy-bodied, if you like, regulations aligned with that will help. And because I think a level of seriousness needs to be brought into this.
And then just to add to that, we're working with the Ecology Building Society, and we know they're working on bringing new mortgage products to the market. So that's their language, mortgage products, to the market that will enable a much simpler journey to getting mortgages for buildings that have carbon capture as part of their agenda. This is brand spanking new as far as they're concerned. They've always led. They're not the cheapest lender on, they're not a high street lender at all, but they are the fastest growing building society in the country. So there's some measure. And then I cannot go anywhere without anybody talking about embodied carbon. It's just every architect, engineer in the country is going, oh, embodied carbon, that's something we need to, which is fantastic. And what that means is, but a lot of the projects we're seeing today are kind of at the front and bleeding edge and the difficult edge of things, but behind us is a wave of interest and pressure. And so, for example, I would normally say, who knows what carbon is trading at today? Does anybody know what the trading price of carbon is today?
No.
It's £51. £51, and it's risen 90% in the last year. So what we will start to see is finally carbon coming up to a price point where actually, I hope, and will keep on working at, that we will get paid for storing in the built environment. And at the moment, at £51, that pays for a kitchen in our affordable homes. I can't get anybody to pay me that yet, but it's not offsetting, it's real, it's carbon, we can kick it, it's in our buildings. And we are doing carbon capture and storage within the retail price of all the buildings we're building. We're not asking for subsidy. And I think in terms of policy lobbying, let's go and get carbon traded into these sorts of buildings.
I think on that note,
hopelessly optimistic.
No, I think that's wonderful, and what a lovely point to end it on. At the bleeding edge, as you say, but with a wave of interest and pressure behind that that continues to grow, and we're really seeing that in our work as a group. The amount of interest and the amount of enthusiasm has just been absolutely wonderful, and I think gives us all life and gives us all hope that there is a way out of the mess that we find ourselves in today. But yeah, thank you so much, everyone, for joining. Thank you so much for those of you stuck around, even though we got a little bit over enthusiastic. It's been an absolutely wonderful evening, so full of ideas and resources and experience. And I want to thank all of our speakers so much for giving up your time and for giving such wonderful, wonderful talks. I'm going to watch it all back because it needs another watch to digest everything. But yeah, an absolutely wonderful evening, and yeah, can't wait for the next one. So thanks again, and take care. Have a wonderful rest of the evening.
Thank you.
Yeah, thanks
Thank
everyone.
you for organising.
Good night.
Brilliant series.
Thanks, everyone.
Yes. Thank you to the organisers.
Yeah, well done.
Thank you, ACAN. And see you all tomorrow.
For some more hot straw action.
More hot straw action. Yes. Good night.
Good night.
Take care all.
Bye.
Bye.